Hello everyone and welcome to NearPod number 5. In today's NearPod we're going to be looking at connectivism, learning communities, and how knowledge is developed through the use of technology. I thought that this cartoon might be appropriate for this NearPod because it speaks to the idea that technology can replace human interaction in terms of helping individuals learn, which we'll see from this NearPod is not the case. However, technology does play a very profound role in helping individuals connect to others and develop a knowledge base that then they can then look at talking to others about, which is kind of weird because I'm talking to nobody right now. So there's two kind of main concepts that I want you to kind of think about or pontificate, reflect, whatever you want to call it. And the first one is, by the time you're done engaging in the activities for this NearPod, you should have some understanding of what connective learning is and how connective learning happens in learning communities. The second thing is that you should have an understanding of how knowledge develops when technology is used to support learning. And you're going to be watching a couple of videos. The Salman Khan from a Khan Academy is one of the videos that talks specifically about knowledge development and how it's really a dynamic, messy process that technology can really help to facilitate. In terms of what you're going to be doing today, your process is the first thing you're going to be watching this introduction, so congratulations, you are currently engaged in step number 1. The second thing is there's a reading for today's NearPod. It's called Learning Networks and Connective Knowledge, and this reading touches upon key aspects of the content for today's class, and that's essentially looking at what learning communities are and what connectivism is and how it relates to what happens inside of a learning community. The third thing to be doing is you're going to be watching a video, a TED Talk. It's a very short TED Talk. It's only about 7 minutes, but it has a really cool representation of some technology that has been developed by Microsoft called Photosynth, and how Photosynth takes individual ideas and puts them into a combined space to represent something. And this is a metaphor for connectivism. The next video you'll be watching is a little bit longer. It's about 25 minutes. And this is Salman Khan, again from the Khan Academy, and he's talking about how video can be used to reinvent education. There's also a very interesting interview at the end where Bill Gates comes out and starts talking to Salman Khan about some of the things that he's doing. And then lastly, you'll be completing a portfolio, e-portfolio self-assessment form. And I want you to make sure that you do that because this is an opportunity for you to reflect on some of the learning and some of the process that you've been engaging in for your e-portfolios. So let's move on to the next. The next thing to think about are questions to consider as you're going through this. Now, I say questions to consider, but really it's questions you need to answer. So you need to be thinking about, how do I answer these questions? What are the answers to these questions? And not all the answers will be given necessarily in this video. That's not what the purpose of this video is. It's to give you things to think about. So the first question is, what is connectivism and how does it relate to learning communities? So connectivism is a very specific learning theory that relates to a digital context. You can Google it if you like. But you should have a good understanding of what connectivism is, and more importantly, how learning communities and online environments help to facilitate this. The second key question is whether or not knowledge development is more like a tree or a pile of leaves. Now this is a metaphor that I'll be using throughout this video, and you'll see it come up in the readings and in some of the videos. And it's very abstract, but really it's just thinking about the principles of, the characteristics of trees versus a pile of leaves, and whether knowledge is like trees or is it like a pile of leaves. And then the third question to go along with that is a learning community like a tree or more like a pile of leaves? And what you'll see in the Salman Khan video is that there's a very specific approach. So Salman Khan describes learning almost like a tree. Whereas if you look at the reading for today's class and the Photosynth video, it describes learning communities as more like a pile of leaves. So the idea is why? Why is the knowledge development more like a tree? And why is a learning community more like a pile of leaves? And more importantly, how do these two things actually interact to support the individual and the community at the same time? So this metaphor of a tree versus a big pile of leaves, I like having some visual representation, so here's some pretty pictures. And it's definitely appropriate given that this course is in the fall. It's got lots of pile of leaves that we can jump into. So this is the metaphor we're looking at. Tree versus a pile of leaves. So I'm going to apologize in advance. There's a lot of text here and I'm going to talk a fair bit. But the idea is this is a very succinct overview of some of the key points that you're going to find in the reading. You do still have to do the reading, by the way, but these are some things that you're going to see that come up. So the first thing is that a learning network is based on a model of distributive knowledge, which basically means that knowledge is distributed throughout the entire community. It's not a top-down approach where there's one individual who knows everything and they teach it to everybody else. A knowledge community is very organic in that all members of the community have a role to play. So the knowledge is distributed. And what ends up happening here is that knowledge is also not only located in one individual, but it's also not located in any one given space. And so this is where technology starts to come into play. So you have the opportunity to learn both within the context of a classroom, within an early learning environment, or you could be learning at home. With mobile technologies, you could be learning while you're on the bus. You could pretty much be learning at any given space, time, whatever. So this is an experience that is really based on interaction as opposed to on acquiring a specific content, so to speak. And along with this, a knowledge community, a learning network requires varying levels of engagement. So one level of engagement is individual to content. So for example, what you're doing right now is you're watching a video with me talking, blah, blah, blah. So you're an individual that's interacting with content, but we know that this is not enough. You can't just watch this video and then say you know everything there is to know about learning networks and knowledge communities and connectivism. Because what ends up happening after that is you're going to talk to people about it, or at least you should talk to people about it. And this is where individual to individual occurs as a level of engagement. And so in this context, this is where people start engaging in discussions, asking questions, pushing each other to think a little bit more outside the box. And this helps the individual to both fortify their current understanding, but also extend what they don't understand by learning from other people. The third level is individual to interface, and basically what this refers to is how the individual interacts with the knowledge that they're interacting with or with the community. So the interface may be a mobile phone that's running a mobile application. It could be a computer with a browser. It could be a TV where they're watching a video. It could be a lot of different things. And then the last level is individual to themselves. And so this is where the individual starts to really think about how does this content relate to me in the context in which I live, and why is this content relevant to that. The third thing to think about is that when you're looking at a learning network or connective knowledge, knowledge is it's sub-symbolic, which basically means that it's not just based on the symbols or representation of the knowledge, which, okay, so that didn't help clarify at all. Knowledge is not content. So for example, if you look at this slide has content on it. This content is represented through symbols, i.e. letters or symbols in sentences, bullets, that kind of stuff. I got some crazy font in red, that kind of thing. But the real knowledge, the real development of knowledge happens beyond the context of this content. So it's sub-symbolic in that it goes below just the representation of the knowledge and really is dependent on these other characteristics. And that means, again, that it's distributed, it's interconnected, it's personal, and an emergent. So this is where that pile of leaves metaphor really starts to become apparent or relevant to the context of a learning network. So knowledge development is more like a pile of leaves because it is interconnected, it is a personal, it is emergent. So and it's distributed within this community. And this is the perspective of individuals who follow learning networks and connective knowledge. Keep in mind that this might not be the perspective that all people hold, it's just what falls under this category. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we start looking at some of the other content is what are some of the characteristics of a knowledge community, because you're going to find this in the reading. So the first thing is that it's based on problems, and the knowledge develops through discussion and argumentation. A knowledge community is not based on this idea, as I said earlier, that there's one person who knows everything, and then that person tells everybody everything, and then everybody else in the knowledge community all of a sudden knows that. That's not what the knowledge community is about. People go to knowledge communities because they have problems, and they engage in discussion and arguments with other people, and through those discussions and those arguments, they start to develop an understanding of what it is they're trying to solve for. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's decentralized, and it's based on this idea of a collective understanding. And what that means is that there's no hierarchy. So as noted before, there's no one person, there's no teacher necessarily in a learning community. It's very similar to Shkata Mitra's conversation with the children, where he puts the computer in the wall and the children start to mentor one another. So a knowledge community is really based on this concept of mentorship. And so what ends up happening is that you might have more knowledgeable others or less knowledgeable others, which is very similar to Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. But there's no one person who's always the more knowledgeable other. You might be more knowledgeable about the interface, so you can help somebody engage in the content by teaching them about the interface, whereas another person might be more insightful about the content itself, so they would then help the person who is more insightful about the interface, and so on and so forth. So this really becomes a collective process where people construct their knowledge through social interactions. And what ends up happening is that there's no limitations. There's no limitations or structure to the process of investigation, right? So there's no one person, as I said, that has the answers, and you go to that person and you're done. Okay. All of the people who participate in the knowledge community have some type of value. So whether or not you're somebody who's more knowledgeable, more experienced, or somebody who's less knowledgeable or less experienced, it doesn't really matter. You need to have both. So very similar to the cartoon that's at the beginning of the slide here, you need to have the person who climbs the mountain to ask the question, and you need to have the guru who sits at the top of the mountain to answer the question, right? You need to have both of those individuals, because if the guru is sitting by themselves at the top of the mountain, they're just going to get really lonely. But if the person climbs to the top of the mountain, there's nobody there, they're not going to have their question answered. So you need to have all people participating in a community, and that's why it's a community. And what ends up happening here is that the broader community works together to solve the problems, and it was really important. And what happens from this is that whatever somebody contributes to this community, that's going to determine what people are going to get from the community, and therefore also determine how the community grows. So if you look at our community online, if nobody posts anything to the community online, then the community won't grow. It's just as simple as that. But it's only when people start to participate and contribute, to ask questions, to answer questions, that the community starts to develop. And then what ends up happening is, as the community starts to develop their own knowledge base, if somebody new comes into the community, then they have to become familiar with the knowledge base that currently exists. So they have to catch up. But they already have a knowledge base with which to draw upon. So that's something that's really important. So these are some of the characteristics of a knowledge community. So as you have this in your mind, I'm going to ask you to keep those things in your head as you're doing the reading, which is Learning Networks and Connective Knowledge. And this reading, I'm asking you to do it first because it really sets the table for everything else that you're going to do in this NearPod. Okay, so I hope you enjoy engaging with the content. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them to Edmodo, and we'll have a discussion there.